School of Social Work for inviting me to talk about something which is very close to my heart. The issue is that we have to talk about the talks. You know, what do we talk about? How do we look at the idea of peace talks? As one of our first speakers constructed that talks are something that are very important because we have to think collectively for a solution of a problem. To that, I would like to bring the question of legitimacy of who can initiate a talk. A very dear poet to me has said, it's not possible when there's war, the peace talks can also happen at the same time. We cannot think of war and peace as two things that can exist at the same time. So the issue is not that I'm criticizing right away the idea of peace talks, but I'm trying to construct that we have to look at the context within which these peace talks have been established. So let me try to construct the idea and the context behind these talks by actually first trying to say when we look at Nagaland, Kashmir, or these regions which are actually in conflict with Indian states, these are not problems in themselves. Actually, India is a problem in these areas. I mean, I'm making a very bold statement here. What I'm saying by that is that the entire process of colonialism is actually starting from top and trickling down to the people. And there is a different kind of power hierarchy between the two regions. So when a Naga is speaking up to an Indian person or an Indian government official, we talk about a power hierarchy. So even if you're talking from a sense of power that is given into you from the source that you think you are a legitimate power holder who can decide who can run a particular area or its governance. And the question of idea of shared sovereignty comes, it's actually not there, because if you look at the Naga issue and you look at two important points in its history, both of which are constitutive product of some kind of a talk. And majority of Naga people that I'm able to believe do not agree with both of these agreements because they're seen as something being told to them to do it rather than actually coming from down up. So what we have here is a very classical case of colonialism where the entire governance, as the earlier speaker was actually talking, that entire idea of governance is basically coming from top to down, and it's not down to up. So people are not involved in the whole process. So, two points that I clearly mentioned. One is the legitimacy, another is sovereignty. And the point of legitimacy, I will try to take it a bit further. You have an entire war happening in central India as well. But the issue of sovereignty of Indian states is never at stake. Because even then, the legitimacy of Indian states is right there. People there feel that they are Indians. They might not agree with the system of this country, but they feel they are Indians. There is no doubt in that. But what we have in Northeast, in Kashmir, in areas like this, is that the Indian state is struggling for legitimizing its control from last 6 years, and it is failing. And that is the problem. That why does the Indian government or Indian state see that they are failing in enforcing this legitimacy which they don't have from people? And legitimacy as a political concept is very important because that is the basis of the rule. I mean, until people don't legitimize this is a democracy that we want, or this is whatever kind of form of government they want, it's not going to go further. And it's very interesting, as we speak, there is voting happening in Kashmir under 200,000 military troopers who are probably dragging people out of the voting station and saying, please go and vote by your choice. You know, they're dragging them out on the point of the gun and saying, vote with your own choice. Because democracy is about choice. But who is going to question the entire culture of militarism that is plaguing our lives, that is destroying our lives, which is out there to just destroy the proper functioning of people's lives. So then you come out with the colonial point of, oh, they're idealists, they have maximalist positions, you know, they don't understand it's shared power. Why is there a problem? Why not there's a problem with the Maharashtrian and there's a problem with Northeast. So the point is that these understandings of these regions are basically very colonial. They are deeply problematic because they are coming from a sense of power that Indian state has in these regions. So they can very easily say that these people are extremists, these are terrorists, these want to destroy the country, these want to, keep trouble going. So the question is really then, what legitimacy does India have after 60 years to continue ruling in these regions when people for the last 60 years have been struggling and saying we want our own sovereignty or we want our right to self-determination. Then I want to construct, I don't want to leave you with a sense of that there's no hope. I want to construct a parallel mechanism of peace talks, which would actually mean the war should stop. The control of the territory through Indian state or through the rebel groups should remove from the region. Then talks can happen, which is nobody holds any control or power in that region. Then we are equal to have talks with Indian state or Indian state is equal to talk with, the ones who are fighting. But right now you are controlling the region and you're asking people, okay, let's have some good talk. While you're killing them in the streets, you want to have a very good talk in an AC room. That's the purpose, So I think this is what is deeply problematic of the whole concept of peace talks as it is happening in the entire region. And we don't just, we are led to a certain idea where we're seeing that these are how the post-colonial informal empires are functioning. China, India, Pakistan, all of these countries vis-a-vis their borderlands have a similar relationship which continues from the old colonial legacy that they once had when they were colonies. So these are very interestingly functioning in the same way, in the same methodology. So if you look at the jails in India, you will see people who are in the jails or the Kashmiris or Naga-India or Manipuris or Muslims or other minorities because the entire power structure has to be kept within a certain monopoly. So I think I have abstractly covered a lot, and I feel the only point that we can move forward is that if we can make a clear effort to solve these political problems through political measures of talks, not mere peace talks, but talks that are aimed at politically resolving these conflicts would actually make lives of people both in India and these regions a bit more comfortable, and we can actually talk to each other than what we've been talking about conflict all the while. Thank you.
May I call Gautam? Gautam, can you please?
Good.
I'd like to thank FUNICH for inviting me to share my thoughts on this theme of reflection on peace talks and the need for conflict resolution in the case of the Indo-Naga process. Although I think it might have been better if me and Sanjay had been kept to the last and people who come from the area had been allowed to speak first, because what we have to say would be a slightly at variance with the experience and the rich experience and the everyday experience and understanding that people who come from the area bring to the table. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. Our understanding, or at least my journey of understanding the issues of the issue of the Naga people's struggle for independence and others became something something that interested us was as a civil liberties activist. We went in to look at violations, the violations that were being committed by the Indian armed forces in Naga areas, and together with NPMR as well as Paul in Manipur. UDR was also one of the petitioners in the famous case which was filed in Supreme Court in 1982, which came up after 15 years for hearing and the final judgment upholding the validity of OPSPA. The judgment came in 1997, but in the course of our to become familiar with the issues, because when you're looking at violations, you're not just looking at violations, you're compelled to also start asking some very elementary questions. Why is it that there was military suppression to begin with? What is it that the Nagas were asking for? What happened in the 1940s, etc., etc. These are the issues that, and therefore our engagement with this issue, and gradually as we engaged ourselves with Naga people's struggle, the struggle in Manipur, and then subsequently in Assam and elsewhere, compelled us to actually start thinking in terms of taking these issues beyond just the question of violations and human rights violations and beyond that. Even our own understanding of ASPA and all, we have gone much beyond that, because I'll come back to it, but even when we talk about impunity, because our understanding of impunity is also expanded and gone beyond just the question of demanding repeal of ASPA, because there are many other forms of legal immunity that exist in this country. So even if ASPA is removed, impunity would still remain, because these are there in one form or the other, either in form of the Army Act, Section 125 and 126, or corresponding acts of the various forces, as well as in form of judicial pronouncements, which have provided and laid down certain conditions which make it next to improbable for any civilian to get justice from any of the from the criminal courts. But before I come to that, therefore, when we talk about the peace process, I think it's interesting, and I think it's important to begin from 1947 to keep some things in mind. Of course, the Indian state that came into existence in 1947 was a state which had decided that it would be engaged in the job of creating a nation state out of a diverse and pluralistic India. And in the process, it was all national state movement. They are incapable of understanding or accepting, not always, but by and large, incapable of addressing and understanding the need to take a less muscular approach to issues where people challenge the nation-state project. That's the crux of the problem, and that's why you have military suppression, you have all the other kind of things which vitiate the climate, vitiate the atmosphere to a point where even possibility of a democratic resolution of the conflict looks very distant or very difficult. And there are many other complications in the course of 60 years, many other also complications enter the scene. So what could have been resolved very easily, peacefully, without shedding blood, way back in 1940s, today has to struggle with these long drawn-out negotiations. And I agree. I mean, probably Mr. Pillai is right, because he is engaged in that. I don't know how negotiations work, so I don't like to venture on the need for a slow and gradual process and all. But if you see that in contrast to what was possible to achieve way back in 1940, then you do lament and you do think, why was it not possible for us to imagine a different way of looking at things and a different way of addressing the issue where Indian states, nation-state project was being challenged from many areas. And I think an earlier speaker spoke about the need to also understand that I mean, it's all right for me as an Indian to feel comfortable with my Indian civilization and its inheritance, but it's not the same necessarily. It will not be the same for everyone. And it need not be, nor can it be mandated. It can't be imposed. That is the simple thing. Peace, of course everybody loves peace. Who doesn't want peace? Because an ending of violence is something we all desire, because we can get on with our life. And things can happen in our everyday lives in a much more predictable, much more secure and protected fashion than what we are used to when there is a conflict. But the trouble is that peace has also come to mean maintaining the status quo. So I am somewhat also skeptical of peace when it is flaunted as if it's something just end violence and everything will be hunky-dory, then we can achieve a process. I don't think it's so easy. It's not so easy. Nor do I believe that war and peace don't go hand in hand. I mean, against the Paris talks, as you remember. So the war went on and the talks went on. So it's possible for the two to go hand in hand. That's not something which is. So there is nothing which says, there is nothing, some set formula that you have to end violence before talks can begin, or that without bringing it to an end, nothing else can be achieved, etc., etc. It depends on what the situation is. Not every conflict that takes place in this country requires the same kind of treatment. We have to distinguish between the struggle in Telangana or Jharkhand for a separate state or Chhattisgarh for a separate state, then from what people are asking for in, say, Naga areas or in Manipur or in Kashmir, etc., etc. My point is that it's high time we accept, and this is not just the responsibility of the Indian government. I think we have to also move away from putting the entire, because a lot of social sanction which the government enjoys to carry out whatever they are doing. We are all witness to it. And Kashmir and 25 years of its history, the recent history, should tell us and warn us that it is very possible for the government to do whatever they want to, because it also enjoys the acquiescence of a very important section of the population which allows them to get away and allows them to escape with a lot of things. So it's not just the blame, or not just to be placed on the government. We also share that responsibility, and we should not forget. It's with this aim in mind we have to approach things. I believe that yes, talks are very important. At some point or other, in order to bring the conflict, when talks would begin, there is no doubt about it. When it begins, under what circumstances it begins, what is on the agenda, what is the openness with which both sides meet each other, what is the balance of force at that particular point, etc. comes into, becomes and plays a very important role. One of our previous speakers spoke very well, pointed out something which is a characteristic of the Indian state, that it takes only those movements seriously which pick up arms. Until and unless the movement pick up arms, the government of India doesn't give a damn, because it doesn't bother them. Getting or handling a non-violent movement or a so-called peaceful movement is much easier for a very strong state to take care of and to handle. And we have seen it. We have seen it, we have experienced it. So it's not as if peaceful demonstrations or peaceful protests and movement would necessarily result in bringing the government to the table and for negotiations. Because it doesn't happen like that, unfortunately. Had it happened, things would have been very different, but that is not the course of history as we understand it, and that is certainly not the way in which Indo-Naga talks have proceeded. Mr. Pillai, in his presentation, he spoke about the various sovereign talks that in the past that have taken place between the government of India and Naga leadership of one kind or other in the last 6 decades. But if you look at the history of the talks, you will find that each one was preceded by Nagas taking up arms, military suppression, and it is that at some point brings out and forces the government or compels the government to come forward to show willingness to hold negotiations. Why certain things happen, why certain things did not happen, also are part of the history. It's not as if the Indian government and the Naga people haven't had and not come to agreements. The first agreement was in 1947 with Akbar, it's called the Akbar-Hayati agreement. The interesting thing is that that agreement fell by the wayside. Why? Because there was dispute over one of the points of agreement. If the Hayati agreement point 9 became a controversial and debatable into a contentious issue, the 16-point agreement of 1960, the July 1960, the point number 13,
proposal
also became a controversial issue. Now, point 13 of the 16-point agreement has spoken of integrating Naga-India. This was contested by Government of India. A lot of way back in 1940s there was difference over, as I said, point 9 of the Hayati agreement. And now very recently last year, the 1963 Act which set up the Naga state, and a new Article 371, Article 371 was there, a new clause was added to it, 371A if I am not mistaken. Now, the interesting thing is that that became a controversial issue last year if you recall. Now, what was the issue of conflict? Now, 371A, according to, if you read the text of it, it clearly, according to the text, it says that that ownership and transfer of land and its resources shall apply to the state of Nagaland unless the legislative assembly of Nagaland by resolution so decides. Now this was read as the Nagaland government as meaning that they have exclusive rights over natural gas and mineral oil. This was disputed by the Union government, which pointed out that entry number 53 of list 1 of 7th schedule makes it the government, the Union government, as the occupier of the word. I don't know what the significance of the word occupier is. Probably in the course of the question answer one thing it will get explained because I myself don't understand it. But nevertheless, this was disputed. The point I am trying to make is that even when agreements are signed, and if they fall by the wayside for one or the other reason, even certain settled issues reopen and become contentious issues, it raises a question about the nature of the agreement and the process of talks that have gone into it. And then we are back to the original question, which is that the resolution, sorry, how many minutes do you have? 2 minutes? How many? 2 minutes. I'm sorry I have to wind up because there are a couple of points I want to make, so I'll quickly run through this point and end it. The point I'm trying to make is simply that it's time we become much more imaginative, having experienced the difficulties in the last 66 years we have had of peacefully bringing various conflicts to an end in this country. It becomes a very difficult task primarily because Government of India publicly declares that there are no armed conflicts going on in any part of the country. All they are dealing with is lawless criminals or anarchists or terrorists who are there trying to handle. So whether it is Maoists or Nagas or Kashmiris, everybody is criminals, terrorists. So there is no armed conflict going on. So when we talk about conflict resolution, there is a problem for me. If Government of India claims that there is no conflict, how come they are talking about conflict resolution? Because we deny that there are wars taking place or there have been armed conflicts. There is a reason I am raising this issue. Insha refers to the fact that in an area which gets highly militarized during these conflicts, and where armed forces of the Union come to acquire enormous powers as well as resources, you can't wish away. Those sitting in power and decision, you can't wish away what the people experience by the presence of such force when they have been at the receiving end of its power and its brutality. It becomes very difficult. Now, in order to win over, I also want finally a peaceful end to a conflict, a democratic peaceful end to a conflict. We all would like that. But in order to reach there, at times it not just becomes necessary, as an earlier speaker pointed out, that people are forced or compelled to pick up guns and fight this so that they can be noticed or taken note of by the central government and they start taking seriously the problem that they confront. But there is another side. As armed conflict declines, there is also a tendency then for other voices to be heard which say that now that the armed conflict is declining, there is a need for making concessions. Kashmir is a brilliant example. For years, India's peace walas and non-violent walas preached to the Kashmiris, give up arms. You give up arms and there is no violence, Indian people and Indian society and even the state would look at you and consider all your demands. They did that. What happened? The Indian society turned its back. We forgot that it still remains an unresolved issue. I fear that the same thing doesn't happen with the Naga issue. Why? Because if this were to happen and if so much that has been invested in this 17 years ago falls flat and there is no democratic resolution, then we are faced with a much bigger problem than we imagine. The last point I want to make is that having said all this, and there is not to be a portion to the government of India or to the ruling establishment over the last 6 decades for vitiating the possibilities of a peaceful resolution in many, many areas. Having said that, but I think the movement also is posed with a challenge. The whole question of integration of territories has raised fissures and opened up brought to forefront yet another dimension that concerns the Naga-India, which they have to, but force taking this on board. That is have to, at some level, address the issue of how the Metis or the Assamese or the Arunachal section of the people are looking at this demand for territorial integration of the Naga-held areas in order that they are able to overcome the reluctance. And this brings me to the final point. There was a vision at one point, which the Naga people had. Some kind of a confederation, idea of a confederation, within which the borders would be very loose or flexible. The kind of conflict that you see between Nagaland and Assam, it's like a border between two enemy states, which are controlled by armed police force of the two state governments. It's tragic. That is not the way in which the Naga people had imagined a political resolution of its own. It never lost sight of its responsibility also of taking others along with them in that struggle. What will it result in? Whether it would be sovereignty, shared sovereignty, or whatever, I believe the one best way of ending and clearing the air and then starting afresh, I believe would be to try something which Indian state and India's liberal intelligence is very reluctant to accept, but it's time for us to start taking seriously a peaceful democratic way that is left open for us, which is the right of self-determination. We fear, the Indian state fears, and its intellectual sphere, and I call them puny-hearted intellectuals who fear the right of self-determination would be opening the doors to India's disintegration. I contest that, and just as their belief is based on speculation, my conviction, even if it's speculated, I believe after 6 decades, it's high time for us to change course, to start thinking and starting afresh by eliciting and ascertaining the vision of the people before we enter into this whole business of negotiations, because negotiations, as Mr. Pellet pointed out, these are a very serious business which involves the two sides to come forward and reason with each other in order to come to some kind of a shared understanding. If that is to happen, that can only happen if when we respect the rights of the people to decide, we take that into account, take that on board, and then start addressing the problem. Probably that is the way in which we need to move, or at least start thinking in terms of, because what we have seen so far at a point that we are not sure whether they are going to move forward or whether they are going to actually revert back to the situation which existed earlier. Thank you very much.
I extend my apology to all the panelists for cutting short of their speech because we wanted to have more discussions. That's the reason why we requested that if you can refrain within the maximum to 20 minutes. If you can finish in 15 minutes, that would be wonderful. Now I call upon Ms. Vinalakshmi Napram. She is the General Secretary of Control Foundations India and also the founders of Manipur Women's Crime Survivors Networks.
Good afternoon to all my young friends. Good afternoon to all the panelists, Mr. Pillai, Dr. Kumar Sanjay, Ms. Malik, Ms. Naga, and Mr. Kekre. I apologize for the delay in coming because I misread the time of the event. It has never happened before in my life, so I really apologize for the delay. The other thing is, the discussions in this room is such that I know many of people will be uncomfortable, but I'm really proud of the courage with which people have spoken up today, and I shall continue in that direction. And thank you very much, Ciro. We met during the entire anti-racism campaign after Nigodanya died, and I'm really grateful to him and to the Forum for Understanding the Naga-India Conflict and Human Rights for giving me this honor to be with you all. I am from Manipur. I was born a Manipuri, not by choice, but by fate of life. You cannot choose your parents or the place of your birth, but I consider myself a human being, and I shall speak on that direction today. Peace talks regarding, there have been experts, I know Sanjay for donkey years. Gautam has been working a lot on these issues for many, many years, and Mr. G.K. Pillai has been working from the government's capacity, and Mr. Yom, Mr. Kekre too, who's many Naga scholars that I've been reading about and writing. And even after more than 70 rounds of talks in more than 16, 17 years, where is the Naga peace talks heading for? And the kind of dismay which is written in the concept note shows, where are we? The work that I started in JNU for my PhD was on peace accords, and particularly the Mizo Peace Accord and the Chittagong Tract Peace Accord of Bangladesh. And I studied these conflicts very carefully, and the Chittagong Tract Accord was hailed by United Nations as the most successful peace accord in South Asian history. But when I landed in Chittagong Tract, I found that actually it was a failed accord. The Mizo Accord is slightly better. But when I looked at the comments on the Mizo Peace Accord, I found that 90% was actually picked up from the Indian Constitution. So there is a lot of question that I had as a young woman growing up in the northeast of India, which is home to over 72 armed groups operating there, home to 45 million citizens. And these are, this is the place which I always say is the beginning of Southeast Asia. I have traveled Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and I said the beginning of Southeast Asia is not Myanmar, it's the northeast of India. We wear sarongs, we eat stinky food, we love the herbs that's growing in our forests and in our gardens. We eat bamboo cooked, rice cooked in bamboos. So there are many things which are there, and this part of India is struggling, as fellow speakers and many of you here know, that there is an ongoing armed conflict for more than 60 years. And as fellow speakers have also confirmed, in fact, these days I am working very closely on United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which is on women, peace and security. And in a reply given to the CEDAW committee by the Government of India says there is no armed conflict within the territory of India. So this is something which shocked me, because There is. Otherwise, the Naga fighters, the Manipuri fighters, the Oromia fighters, are they criminals? Are they terrorists? All these questions arise. So first, and again, the denial of the existence of conflict. So when you are resolving this Naga conflict, what is it at the back of government of India's mind? Do they love the Naga so much that they want to give everything that you ask for? In fact, in a discussion I had with Karmala Bhaya, who is one of the interlocutors of the peace talks, this is what he told me. You may want the moon, but it doesn't mean we will give you. Understand the metaphor. You may want the moon, but it doesn't mean we will give you. And certain things are there, but at the same time, as fellow speakers, I think as Mr. Kekrium also said, I loved when I was in Delhi University, I loved this book, Imagine Communities by Benedict Anderson, which many of you must have read. I love the idea that 10 of us can come together and form a nation state, even dream of it. And for me, as a Manipuri, I do not feel it wrong that the Naga nation would develop in the most beautiful way. It's their right, it's your right. Stand by it. But it will take time. Don't give up yet. I studied it very carefully, and that's what I thought. There's a lot of struggle that still needs to be done. And as you know, as what we're doing right now is, that is the first thing, they deny that there is a conflict. And how do you go about doing a peace negotiation under that premise? So it's not jarring, it's not coming together. In fact, so there is a problem there which we urge upon Mr. Pillai and others who have been a part of government to really call a spade a spade. If you have cancer, don't call it it's a headache. Don't give us a paracetamol tablet. I have met the Prime Minister 4 times, and that's what we told them. If there is armed conflict in the Northeast, accept it, address it. The first thing Government of India, I said, should tell the whole people of the Northeast, we are sorry for the armed atrocities. And if there is no armed conflict, why do you put the Armed Forces Special Powers Act there? Why there are 60 battalions of the armed forces? More than that in many parts. And in fact, the Naga conflict, which is the longest running conflict in entire South Asia. It's not Afghanistan or Pakistan. It's in our region, which is the longest running conflict. And it is serious, and we've got to recognize that and deal with it with the courage that it deserves, and not by ducking it, by sending more military and paramilitary. That is not a solution. You cannot even teach a 5-year-old child how to behave. How will you teach a 20-year-old Naga boy how to behave at the barrel of a gun? So there are certain things that you've got to understand as a government. The best government, I feel, should be second set of parents. And if you think the Northeast is the children of New Delhi, treat us like one. And in fact, what I'm also going to speak is in terms of what is the reality here. In fact, I work with women and men across more than 60 armed conflict zones around the world. I work with friends from Afghanistan, I work with friends from Rwanda, with friends from Guatemala, and friends from Liberia. And this is what they have told me, and even Congo. You must have heard of Congo, right? Have you heard something called coltan? Have you everyone in this room heard of a thing called coltan? Have you heard about something called a mobile phone? You have heard something. Now coltan is a chemical without which your mobile phones will be dead. And this is only found in Congo. An armed conflict situation was created in Congo so that the corporates and the governments could take out coltan, extract the resource of that beautiful country. And as a result, Congo is one of the most devastated war zones in the entire world. I'm bringing attention to the northeast of India, the place where the first oil was struck, the place where uranium is found, the place which has got oil, natural gas, a place which can produce 66% of India's hydroelectric about the resource. It is one of the heaviest densely populated forested areas left in entire India. So please remember that this is not about all the struggle, it's also about fight for resource. And as Southeast Asia is being opened up through Moree and other areas, I was telling Mr. G.K. Pillai about the developments I'm seeing in Manipur. One development is the way in which the road from Imphal to Moree is smoothened up in the most beautiful way. Why? Because of Lucas. Now, so watch out for what's happening in terms of resource, in terms of what's happening there. Whenever I go to North America or Canada, I always go to the areas where the Indian reservations are. Indigenous Indians were wiped out. New York belonged to them. Many parts of Canada belong to them. They look like you and me. Indigenous people of an ancient world. That's how I look like, you all look like on the North. Original inhabitants of the earth, of our native lands. The fight for the concept of the idea of India. We contest it through our struggles, and that's what makes the government of India uncomfortable. It's not going to end now. It will take some more years. But this is a fight which is quite serious, in which every day, in my home state, 3 to 4 Manipuris are shot dead because of this. In Naga-India, at least the conflict killing has come down a bit. This year in Manipur, we have got over 70 bomb blasts. So it's only increasing. So in terms of how is the way in which, just going back, how is it that in these kinds of resolving conflicts in the region, how sincere is our government? How sincere, in as much as we point fingers at New Delhi, let's also start pointing a little bit of fingers against our own political leaders. What kind of political leadership are we electing to represent us, to talk about these issues? The way the voting goes on, you can give them 2,500 rupees rate in Manipur. We also have a lot of soul searching to do within ourselves. But definitely, the government, the blame goes on them first because they are like the second set of parents. The very fact that a Tangkul doesn't understand much about Kuki culture because it's not there in our textbooks. Look at your textbooks in Nagaland, in Manipur, in Assam. You can learn about Rani Ki Jhansi, but you don't learn about Rani Kaideko. You don't learn about different patterns of your beautiful sarogs. You don't celebrate each other's cultures. We are broken from within and we are broken from without. We are broken in every sense for more than 50 years. And the Naga peace process is just a reflection of how a group of people try to get their senses and negotiate with the government of India to feel what is their rightful claim. And after 70 rounds of talks, as a previous speaker said, you've got to demonstrate where it's going, because the rest of Northeast is going to watch. And again, as Dr. Secretary also said, I also met Uncle Muiva a few years back, and this is what I told him. You see, if I ask any of you sitting in this room, name me a leader so courageous, so sacrificing in the Northeast that you'll have tears in your eyes when you meet him or her. Name me one. I don't have one for myself. We've got to create good people who could take a leadership role in the work that we are doing. And I told Uncle Muiva, Uncle, you are one of the best Northeast leaders now that India is recognizing, the world is recognizing. As you fight for Nagaland, fight for the entire Northeast. That's what I told him. Because, as you saw, in the entire episode, which erupted in Delhi on 29th of January after the killing of a 19-year-old Arunachali boy, Forget about armed conflicts, recognizing. India doesn't even recognize there's racism in this country, for which young men and women of our region could be beaten to death. Yesterday we handled the case of a young woman who was found dead on 14th of April this year in Subdivision Enclave area. There are many things that we got to question, and for me, as I look back, India actually is a very young nation. A 67-year-old republic is actually young. French is more than 700 years old republic. India is an ancient civilization, but it's a very young nation. So we are telling India it's time for you to consider. And for many of us in the Northeast, we still remember have a long struggle to do. Now, when we do those struggles, if you pick up arms, you'll be called a terrorist, because as per definition, that's what right now it is in front of us. So let the policymakers think what is the best way out. For young people of the region, which belongs to your generation of the 20s, my generation of the 30s, the 40s, the future of Northeast is in your hands, in our hands. It's for us to stand up, fight for what is you believe in, for the justice of the people of the Northeast. The Naga peace process is one light in this, and we look forward to seeing how it takes the entire Northeast, either to light or to darkness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veena. Now our last panelist, Professor Sanjay Morrison, can you please address us?
Ini problem lagi. Saya talking ke mai problem ni itu konsep dia. Jadi orang confused laga. Jai.
Since I'm the last speaker, it becomes very easy for me. It becomes very difficult for you all. Really, I know patients must be running in. But my task is easy because a lot of patients have been covered. And therefore one need not repeat several things which has already been said, even if one maybe to some extent disagree with it. Now, you see, what I want to speak here is on a very specific topic. And that is accords. Because accords is a very complex strategic movement. If we don't understand this complex strategic movement, we lose the war even before it begins. Because one of the fundamental errors which politicians of the people, not of the state, and I have no quarrels with what the state does because that is what it is supposed to do. The problem lies with us. Because we don't analyze what the state would be doing, and then at the end of it we say, hey, you behave like a state. How is the state going to behave? It will behave exactly as it is supposed to. So I will not go into the things which state does, because it is meant to do that. What I want to emphasize on is on this complex strategic movement, and that is accords. Accords, pacts, treaties. What do we mean by them? Because one of the cardinal failures of people's movement in India has been the singular failure in understanding the political significance of negotiation. Because it is assumed that when you negotiate, you are working under a rubric which is different from war, and that is peace. And this is completely incorrect. One of the most important treatises on the art of war has been written by Sun Tzu. And people, since all of us are students here, I am teaching, but I also continue to study. I don't want to dabble in active politics because I don't think I'm cut out for that and the things which it requires. I like to sit and have a nice time in the evening. But I think that as students, just because you are not going on the streets or organizing organizations or negotiating with NGOs and getting funds
that does not mean that you stop to be political. It is extremely important to think, because the beginning of all battles is in the idea. And which is why you will find that most of the dictatorial governments, the first thing which they do is to impose censorship. And this is the biggest weapon that you and I have as middle class intellectuals. So it is extremely important to understand what accord means. And the first aphorism which I have picked up from Sun Tzu is that absence of violence is not absence of war. If you read Sun Tzu, he argues that the best general is that who wins the war without violence. The art to prevent violence for as long as you can is the hallmark of a very successful general. And that is why to assume that negotiation is absence of war is the first biggest mistake. Again, if you see that even if you go into the annals of modern history, not back to ancient China, you will find that absence of violence and absence of open hostility has been actually the period of worst kind of warfare, and we know what about this when we discuss about Cold War. Some of the most undemocratic processes, toppling of governments, surreptitious and clandestine wars were conducted in the period of Cold War. Now if you begin from this premise, then one starts understanding that when one talks of accord, one is not talking about absence of war, but a different kind of war. And this is what one has to understand, because guerrilla leaders, they are very good in fighting with guns. But when it comes to fighting with words and ideas, that is very effective. And one of the biggest examples is not Muiva, Michael Collins of the IRA. He was one of the best guerrilla brains which Ireland and I think Europe ever produced. And he was killed by his own people. Because when he negotiated with the British, he came out short. And he shortchanged the IRA movement, and the IRA guerrillas themselves went and killed. Now, this is the tragedy which one has to understand. That what happens when we negotiate? What goes wrong when we negotiate? Now, if you see Naga Accords, I would like to attract your attention that Naga Accords is not a singularity. It has happened to accords across the world. Three things are found, and it is found ad nauseum whenever you negotiate with state. And I don't think to negotiate with civilizations. I don't think to negotiate with peoples. It's a fundamental and categorical mistake to say civilizations negotiate. They don't. You always negotiate with state. And one must recognize that negotiation is a powerful statecraft. If you don't recognize that, then you come out with very, very mistaken conclusions, and you start equating a Bihari rickshawala with Indian state. And nothing can be more faulty than that. I am from Bihar. I get very offended when Biharis get killed in Northeast. To tell you very frankly. Because the poor sort gets beaten up in Bihar, goes to Northeast, and then goes and promptly gets killed. Now, one always negotiates with states, and you will see that there are certain similar traits which the process of negotiation relies on people's movement. What is the first? That you will find that always the fundamental premise on which the movement begins gets compromised. वो उर्दू में एक शेर है ना, हर किसी को मुकम्मल जहां नहीं मिलता, कभी जमीन तो कभी आसमान नहीं मिलता. Whenever you negotiate, you lose both the heaven and the earth. You are always shortchanged. The second thing which again happens in every negotiation, and this is equally tragic, that the organization which negotiates always splits. And I can bet you my right arm, tell me one organization which has not split when it has entered process of negotiation. And the third thing, whenever you negotiate, you will find that very rapidly the term of of the discourse changes from rights to communities. Because the interests of the community, the idea of the community suddenly takes precedence over the idea of nation and peoples. And if this has happened time and again, how the entire Irish people's movement gets split into the Protestants and the Catholics. How the peoples of Northeast get split between Nagas, Metis, Cookies, now North Naga, South Naga, God knows when this split is going to stop and doesn't know. And the final thing, that you will find that, and this happens again, that every act of negotiation, where it culminates, the next negotiation does not build upon that, but goes back to a point which is even more backward than the first negotiation. This has happened time and again. Now, see, I am not indulging in kite flying or clutching at straws. I will come down to concrete examples. Check out the Naga movement. Because in Northeast, one organization and one movement which has negotiated the maximum is that of the Nagas. Because till date, they have negotiated more than they have fought. Yeah. And this is something about which people need to be disabused. It's not a mindless terrorist organization which is hell-bent on committing mindless violence. It is an organization which has taken negotiating very, very seriously. In 1947, it entered into a negotiation even when the first bullet was fired. The first bullet was fired in the Naga Hills post 1953. Then you will find that it negotiated again in the 1960s. Then it entered into a ceasefire from 64 to 72. It negotiated again in 72. The hostilities begin in the late 80s and from the mid 90s it is again negotiated. So if you do a rough mathematical calculation of the period they have fought and the period they have negotiated, you will find that of the 75% of the entire period of Naga movement was actually spent either in negotiating or in a truce. And what has happened as a result of this negotiation and truce? This should be an eye-opener. Every time they have entered into a negotiation, they have got less than what they got in the first negotiation. When they negotiated in the Akbar-Hyderabad agreement, they were recognized as the rightful owners of the land, resources and people who identified themselves as the Nagas. When they negotiated in 1972, what was given was the administrative areas of Nagaland. When they negotiated in 1972, it was simply terms of surrender. When they negotiated from the mid-90s, it had not resulted into anything tangible. All that has happened, that the four major principles, which were the basic founding premises for the negotiation to begin, have been watered down. Now, this is something which one has to understand as to why this happens. Because if you don't understand this, then my friend, whenever you negotiate, you lose. Now, the problem is, why does this happen? On this, I'll just make two very brief points and then I'll make my peace with you all. The first point which you must understand, that one should not have an episodic understanding of the gods. Like, I was extremely impressed by our very esteemed interlocutor, Mr. Padmanabhaiya, about the intricacies of accord making. The problem is, what I would not agree with him, and this is where I disagree with him, is that every accord is specific, but every accord is also an ontological reality. Accord making is a structure which is what one has to understand. And if you don't understand that accord is a structure and take every accord as an episode, you will make mistake. Because one must remember, as Hegel had said, that if you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. And if you have a notion of accord as a structure, then there is a second aphorism related with it. That every accord is embedded in a historic state formation. Now if every accord is embedded in a historic state formation, then before you enter into a negotiation with any state, it is bounden upon you to analyze and understand the nature of the state form with which you are going to negotiate. If you accept this aphorism, then there is a third element, which is picked up from the French. And they say that the more you remain similar, the more you change. One must understand that the two parties which negotiate, with the passage of time they do not remain similar. Now if you analyze the Indian state, you will find that Indian state changes. It reworks itself, and I would like to argue that there are very interesting historical nodes around which the Indian state reworks itself. It is extremely important for us to work these nodes out. At the current juncture, which is extremely important for us, people who believe in the idea of federalism or believe in the idea of asymmetrical federalism, which is a new term which is being coined and bandied around by people who are engaging in accord, must realize that in the current instance, the Indian state is going through a very interesting phase, whereby the state is in the process of very active centralization. Very active centralization. Given this phase of thrust towards centralization, to what extent can you negotiate asymmetrical federalism with the state is a matter which has to be taken with extreme strategic caution.